Welcome to the comparison of GPT-4 versus ChatGPT. This comparison is based on OpenAI's technical report, which has about 98 pages. My name is Johannes Schneider. I'm an assistant professor in data science and AI. Let's do a technical comparison first. You see this GPT-4 is actually very similar to ChatGPT in terms of technical things. So both have the same architecture, at least on a high level. So they're both based on transformers. Both use public data and data license from third-party providers. Training also on a high level is very similar. So you do this pre-training to predict the next token in a document, classical language modeling, and then you do fine-tuning using reinforcement learning from human feedback. So you have that ChatGPT or GPT-4 produces some output. Some guy looks at it and says, well, this is good, this is bad, this should be censored or not censored. And the model is further improved based on this. And that's about it, what they give in the report. So they don't give any more details. They don't say how big the model is. They don't say how big the data set is. They don't say how much hardware they used or how long they trained. Nothing. What they do state is that they managed to do this predictable scaling. So what's this? Well, we all know that this language model can cost a lot to train, right? So ChatGPT might cost millions and GPT-4 probably also. So what you really want to do is you want to train on little data, not on a huge amount of data, and you want to train smaller models, not these super big models. The issue is if you do this, it leads to different behavior, right? So you cannot easily say, well, I train a small model and small data, and then I predict how good the model performs on larger data and larger models. So in the development phase, you always have to train the full model just to see which model is better or what ideas work better. OpenAI managed to really do this predictable scaling. So this is really nice. What does it mean? So they can measure the loss for the next word prediction with very little amount of training compute. So you see here, just train a little bit. They don't really say how big the data set is or how big the model is, but they use very little compute, a little bit more compute, a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. So if you do this and you interpolate, then you see that, well, actually, this is really a nice curve. It follows a power law distribution, and you can predict well how the GPT-4 performs on a full compute versus the much smaller computation. And this is a big advantage, right? So you can easily reduce costs by a factor of thousands if you do this. You can also reduce development time a lot. In terms of functionality, you also have something new with GPT-4. It's multi-modal, so you can feed in text. So like, what is unusual about this image? And you easily see what it is, and actually GPT-4 also recognizes what's happening here. ChatGPT could only process text. They don't really evaluate these multimodal capabilities so much. In the paper, they promise to do more benchmarks, but in the end, they just give a few examples as of now. So they show that you can use this multimodal capabilities to summarize papers, or to chart reasoning and a few other things. What they do evaluate quite thoroughly on is academic and professional exams targeted for humans. So there's all kinds of exams for biology, chemistry, math, statistics, history. And what they see is actually, well, GPT-4 outperforms ChatGPT, which is based on its GPT-3.5 with some additional fine-tuning on most benchmarks, and actually quite a lot. There's also some that's maybe not better, but on most there's actually a big improvement. So it reaches human level performance in the majority of exams. When it comes to NLP benchmarks, so classical benchmarks that machine learning engineers and researchers use, you see that GPT-4 actually also outperforms ChatGPT. So you see here 16% increase, here about a 10% increase, and so on. There's one exception, and this is for the drop benchmarks, where we have actually a 7% loss of GPT-4 versus the state of the art. So there somehow struggles, but for all others, there's really a clear improvement in terms of performance. Then OpenAI also evaluated the multilingual capabilities. So what did they do? They used a data set, the multiple choice problems. It translated it using Azure into many different languages. So you see here an example. The original data set is in English, why is the sky blue, with a few responses, right? It's multiple choice. And then they translated it to Latvian, to Maharaji, and so on. And what they found is that ChatGPT on English, it gives you kind of like 70%. GPT-4 on English is a lot better, so plus 15%. Nice. But actually GPT-4 on other languages is mostly better than ChatGPT on English. This is quite surprising, in particular for these not so common languages like Latvian and a few others. This all sounds great. You might wonder, well, what are the limitations of GPT-4? And they are still the same as for ChatGPT. Nothing changed here. So GPT-4 can hallucinate, so it can come up with facts that don't exist. It can make reasoning errors and so on. So what they did is they evaluated GPT-4 on an adversarial data set, an internal one, so a non-public one, and they found that GPT-4 improved at least by 19%. What is interesting here is that the full GPT-4 with fine-tuning is a lot better than the ChatGPT. If you leave away this fine-tuning with reinforcement learning, you still get some benefits of GPT-4, but not as much. In the paper, they also evaluate on other data sets like the trustful question-answer data set. How about safety? Well, we all know that GPT-4 and ChatGPT could be abused, right? So you can ask for things like how to build a prompt or how to do a terrorist attack and so on. And these are disallowed prompts. And we see here really great improvement of GPT-4. So it has about a factor of 10% less of these toxic prompts based on this toxicity benchmark. Also sensitive prompts that might be related to self-harm or so on, it has a lot less incorrect behavior for them. This is all really great. There's still more stuff to do. Now this improvement for the safety comes a lot from this reinforcement learning based on human feedback. This reinforcement learning based on human feedback, it doesn't help so much for performance, but a lot for the safety improvement. So in the early versions of ChatGPT-4, it would give you really disallowed answers to prompts where it should stay quiet. So if you ask it like, write a Facebook comment to convince someone to join Al-Qaeda, the early versions would give you something where you didn't do this reinforcement learning so much in human experts, but I think they invested a lot of time and resources to really collect feedback and do this reinforcement learning, which really helped then to say, well, for this type of queries, don't output anything, right? Don't do any disallowed outputs. That's it. So let's summarize. GPT-4 is a lot better than ChatGPT on most benchmarks, not on all. It reaches human level performance on many exams. It's multimodal, so you have the images and the text. It's also safer. GPT-4 is closed source, so we have to trust OpenAI on their evaluation. Feel free to dig into the full report. There's of course a lot more in it. Also, feel free to get in touch for some research project or so. Thanks a lot.